So, right as I bought my GoPro Max, pre-ordered it, I found out one thing. It's kind of pissing me off. Greetings and salutations, I am Scojo Insta360. Welcome to one of my favorite stomping grounds. This is Dillon Falls, that way, in Central Oregon. Come here probably 50 times a year. Gorgeous walk, gorgeous falls. It's a gorgeous part of the world, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, I have to admit, I was wrong about something. I know, it's hard to believe, but I pre-ordered the GoPro Max and thought it had a feature that it doesn't have. I'm a little ticked off. No slow motion in 360? Yeah, you heard right. The GoPro Max. I would have sworn when I read it in the specs that it was going to do 4K 60 frames per second, which on my Insta360 One X, it has 50 frames per second, and it looks great. Love it. Even has 100 frames per second. Love that just as much. So I figured, well, we're going to end up with this 60 frames a second. I'll buy the camera. That's good enough. But then I found out, no. It'll do 60 frames per second in 4K in hero mode. But the camera itself in 360 will only be shooting 30 frames per second. That means officially in 360, no slow motion on your GoPro Max. Why do you want slow motion? Now, a lot of these cameras have been calling themselves action cameras, like Insta360 One X, and it's borderline not, because it's not durable at all. There's not a lot of ruggedness to this camera, but it shoots at 100 frames per second and 50 frames per second, which is great for action, because if you're going to be doing action, slow-mo makes everything look cooler, especially action. In fact, why don't we just head in here and I'll do 3 of the same action. We'll do it in 3 different frame rates, and then you can break down to tell me which is the coolest. Now, for those of you who are fairly new to cameras, what the hell is slow motion? What the hell is frame rates? Well, the amount of frames per second is literally the amount of pictures this camera takes every second. I'm not actually moving, you're just seeing pictures of me laid back to back to back to back. Right now, 24 of them per second. When you get up into 60 frames per second, that creates it so that when you slow things down, the slow motion looks even nicer, because you've got more frames to choose from. At 24 frames a second, if you try to slow it down, it becomes jittery and weird looking and lots of motion blur that is really not very pleasing. So when you get into 60 frames per second, you've got about 2 times motion to slow down. When you get into 100 frames per second, 120 frames per second, you've got 3 to 4 times slower. And it looks cool. So, Why doesn't every camera just shoot in 100 frames per second? I mean, if it makes the slow-mo look cool, would it just make the normal mo look cool? No, actually it doesn't. First of all, the higher the frame rate, the lower the resolution. So on this camera, you'll get your 100 frames per second, but it drops it down to 3K. So you lose some of the clarity of the image. So you get lower resolution. You also get gigantic files. And the other thing is, when you shoot in 24 frames per second, it creates a thing called motion blur, which is it's almost detected subconsciously. It just adds a little bit of definition to motion that the other frame rates don't, so it looks almost too clear. So 24 frames per second is great for just normal motion. So the fact that GoPro is a GoPro and it's rugged and it's made for the outdoors and waterproof and all that fun stuff, but can't shoot slow-mo? I gotta tell you folks, we gotta hope that there's going to be some kind of a firmware update fairly early on in the game to get something more than just 30 frames per second, because that could be a real deal killer for a lot of people. So I'll be packing my One X with me for my B-roll, and the Max, I guess, for when I want to beat the living crap out of my camera. Alright, well, you can probably hear it, but the falls are right over there. But to get to them, I have to go up what I call the beast. These stairs are sort of the bane of my existence, but they're awesome because they'll look great in 100 frames per second. So I am Skojo Insta360. I'm going to end this on epic 100 frames per second, going up the beast and then into the falls. So while you're watching that, click subscribe, smash it, beat the crap out of it, love it. Subscribe, share this video. I'm Skojo Insta360. It's time for some 100 frames per second. Get my blood good.
La 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 la, baby, slow it down, slow it down. La 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 la, hey, take the time, next time round. La 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 la, baby, slow it down, slow it down. La 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 la, hey, take the time, next time round. I wanna fall, yeah, I wanna feel the feeling too, yeah. I like to savor everything, and I'd like to feel it with you. But sometimes I'm wishing that you could see the things I do. I wish you stopped to take the time, because you know a woman needs to think things through. Let's take our time, baby. I'd like to see things unwind.